communism is based on the foundational principle that you as an individual have no worth. Period. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Michael Voris Show. I'm your host, Michael Voris. If you can believe it or not, for those of you who are old enough to remember this weekend marks the 34th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square Uprising in Beijing. 34 years. Just for those people who might not know, let's take a little look at this real quickly, shall we? Because it bears a lot of inquiry and examination. What you're looking at here are famous shots of what happened. There were about 100,000, mostly young people, students, who converged on Tiananmen Square. Now, Tiananmen Square is not very far from the Forbidden Palace, with that great big huge portrait of Mao Zedong over the top of it, and that's sort of the heart of Chinese communism and the Cultural Revolution and all of that. And at the same time this was happening there in Beijing, the Soviet Empire under Mikhail Gorbachev was also clearly beginning to disintegrate. It didn't know exactly when it would happen. It would take about another year and a half. But it was clear to all the observers in the West that the Soviet Empire's goose was cooked. It was the weakening of Soviet communism that was part of the inspiration for these students who came out against communism in China. Came out in force. I mean, 100,000 students. It was what happened over the course of a couple of days. They became but what did they do? The Chinese communists, this is to show you sort of the brutality of communists. There's that famous shot of the student standing in front of the tanks, and the tanks, at the moment the shot was taken, not proceeding. And there was a real worldwide sense of look at people rising up against their oppressors. Ronald Reagan had just finished his stint in office. George Bush Sr. was president when this was happening. He'd been, Reagan's vice president. There was a lot of sort of chest-pounding, rah-rah American, rah-rah democracy. The Soviet Empire is collapsing. The students are rising up against communism. In Red China, there was a sort of like spring breakout, you might want to call it, of pro-democracy, pro-human rights, pro all of this, throwing off the old oppressive regimes of Russia and China, and it was not to be the case. And as the students found out in China, in Beijing, the Chinese military, the communist military, was brought in and put that down with brutal force in very short order. That picture of that young fellow standing in front of the tanks, that procession of tanks, and them coming to a stop, has great symbolic value. But by the time that picture had sort of gained worldwide attention all over the worldwide press, the brutality had already been launched against those student protesters, and I say mostly student protesters, and that entire thing was simply put down in very brutal force. Now, what some people don't realize is part of the reason they were able to sort of the students were able to get away with that and assemble and get together, and they had some freedom of movement and some various ways to communicate. Again, you're in the days really before cell phones and internet and all of that. So how are they getting the word around? Well, word of mouth and little flyers. Where were the flyers being printed in separate little shops? There was this kind of underground busy bee effort. And then once it kind of got enough momentum going, well, then it sort of began its own inertia, and people would show up, and it just kept turning into these larger kinds of rallies or larger events, larger numbers showing up. The Chinese communists at the time weren't really, the leadership were not really prepared for, hey, there's this massive uprising going on right smack in the heart of the city what do we do? And Tiananmen Square is a very, very large open area. It was essentially the parade ground for demonstrating Chinese military might. When you see shots of all the tanks and all that kind of stuff going through, Tiananmen Square is where that happens. Just like Red Square is where that happens in Moscow, when they show, want to put on a display of military might and their rocket launchers and tanks and all that stuff. That's, everybody has a great big giant parade ground where they show that. Well, that's what Tiananmen Square was. So it really did become, for the students and the uprisers, the revolutionaries, or the counter-revolutionaries, I suppose you could call them, since the Chinese communists were the original revolutionaries. They're just now the status quo. That whole parade ground became a symbol of the might and the oppression of the Chinese Reds against their own people. And that's a point I want to really stress here. Do want to remind you, however, just before we get into some of that and the worldwide implications of it, that we are having our Strength and Honor Men's Conference. Talk about young guy standing there in front of the tanks. We want to have invite you to that. Click on the link, Strength and Honor. Our theme this year is related to staying within the church and fighting. Stay on the bark of Peter. That's our men's conference, Strength and Honor. We have it every year here in Michigan on the first weekend. That's the August 4th through 6th this year. So please click on the link and sign up for it. So what's the expansive thought here about that, besides the fact this happened 34 years ago this weekend? The much larger thought is the view of communism that so many people just fail to grasp. It's not a system ultimately based on economics. Never has been. It's a system based on an outcome in economics that is preceded by a view, a philosophy about the nature of man. And here's where this is huge separation between Christianity and communism. And this is ultimately why these two forces, as communism is always atheistic. It has to be atheistic. If it admits of a God, it sort of loses its moorings and begins to drift over into Christianity pretty darn quickly. So what's the foundational thing here? If you are a human being, you either serve God, Christianity, or you serve the state, communism. It's interesting to note that practically every sort of tyrant and despot that ever tried to gain world power always had the anti-Christian view of the nature of man, even before there was such a thing as Christianity. Thank you for watching The Michael Voris Show. If you'd like to watch the entire episode, please head over to churchmilton.com and sign up as a premium member. If you need to sign up to become a premium member, go to churchmilton.com/go premium.